Page 89, September 1853. Dear Austin, it's been a while since I could sit down to write you. We hitched a ride on the back of a preacher's buggy that took us a long and bumpy journey through the state of Virginia. After that, we walked for a few miles before coming upon a good sized pond. We found an old man sitting there in his wagon. He had driven his ridge into a water to tighten his wheels. Jupiter and I decided to have a swim to cool off. The old man smiled and tipped his cornshuck hat as we swam by him. Do you remember that old man Gizzards looks like? This old fellow had the same leathery looking face and red nose. He seemed friendly enough, sitting and picking at his teeth with a goose quill, but there was a curious smell about him. As we swam in closer to his wagon, we could see that his leg was stretched out afore him with one pant leg rolled up. Bound to his leg with a string were two live toads. I expect it seems a curious sight, the old man fellow spoke up. He went on to tell us that his name was Ferguson T. McGrath, and he explained how he had been bitten by a copperhead that very morning. 'Twas lucky for me I had my chickens in tow. He pointed to the crate of chickens in the back of his wagon. Fergus went on to tell us how he had killed one, slitting it down the middle, and then tied its entails over the bite. When the chickens began to turn cold, he threw it off and caught the toads. Their bodies draw the venom out, Fergus explained as Jupiter and I stared bug-eyed at the toads, which still had some life left in them, for they would wiggle every now and then. I kept thinking of Plug Ugly and was glad that Possum was not there to witness their struggle. When the toads finally died, Fergus united the sorry-looking things and threw them into the water. He said that his bite was all cured, and to celebrate, he drove out of the pond and shared some dried beef cottonseed tea with us. Be still, oh my heart, I said as I whiffed the dried beef. Jupiter looked at me with a grin and grinned. We were both thinking of Possum then. Be still, oh my heart, Fergus repeated. Sounds like a song. Then he pulled a mouth harp out of his pocket and began to play. Every once in a while he'd stop and start to sing, Be still on my heart, my gal, and I had to part. It went on and on like that, with lots of good rhymes. We traveled with Ferguson T. McGrath and his wagon for the next 2 days. He told us some good tales and he knew lots of songs, but as much as we enjoyed his singing and stories, I had to admit that we were not sorry to leave him, for the company he was kept was hard on the nose. After sharing a wagon with a crate of chickens, 3 piglets, and 6 ducks, the smell was mighty powerful. We had confided in Ferguson all about Darcy and how we'd hoped to find her. He told us about a slave auction some 5 miles south of here where we might look for her. But you must be careful. And Jupiter, you're best not doing the looking, he cautioned. He had wished He said he wished he could take us there himself, but he had pigs to sell. We understood and promised to be careful. When we parted ways, Ferguson seemed concerned and wouldn't let us go without giving the rest of his dried beef, 2 turnips, and an onion. I felt so grateful for all he had done for us, and I wanted to give him something. The only thing I had was old turnip head. I will make another one for Reuben, I promise. Ferguson laughed when I put the stick into his wagon and said that it was the best exchange of turnips he'd ever had. By the time he let us off, the critter's stink was all over our clothes, and we were desperate to find a creek or a river to dunk ourselves in. We walked for a couple of miles, but didn't find one. As it turned out, that was lucky for us. But what we did find were 3 young men who were sitting in the shade of a lucas tree. At first, I was hoping they might offer us something to eat, but when we got closer to them, I could see that they had just been sucking off of a jug for a spell. Now take a looky here, one of them called out on seeing us. He had a round, marked face under a straw hat and poppy eyes that reminded me of Plug Ugly. Who might this little master and his slave be come walking our way? He taunted. At first I thought they might be all gurgled and no guts. So Jupiter and I just kept on walking. Now yous two stop right there, the man with Plug Ugly's eyes barked so loudly that my hair stood on end. The other both turned to look at us as we stopped dead center in the road. He don't resemble a Muller nor an Ingram neither, another one of them said. Whose house you from, boy? Who's your daddy? I don't recognize your features none. I tried to think of how I should answer this, but before I could, the tallest man stood up and put his hand on the other man's shoulder as he waved the jug in his hand. It's of no consequence, John Lee, whose house he might come from. He's a guest passing through Horn lands, and shall our mamma has taught us our manners. Why, it would be downright unmannerly of us boys not to offer him some refreshment. The other two laughed at this and got to their feet. Looks as if his darky could use a little contentment. One of the men said in a gargly voice as he pointed to Jupiter. Oh, of course we can't have him holding the jug to his mouth, he snarled. That would never do. No, sir. That would ruin the whole branch of this here sweet contentment of any of us. We'll just have to pour some into him, the man called John Lee said as he took a wobbly step towards us. I was trying to figure out which way we should run, but they had all surrounded us. I could see Jupiter's nails digging into his walking stick as we inched closer to each other. I hiccuped really loud, and one of the men began to laugh. I quick put my hand over my back pocket. Somehow, just holding my hand over the flask calmed me enough to keep it from coming on. But there was nothing to calm my knees, for they had began to buckle beneath me so that I didn't know if I could even run. But just when I looked as if we were done for, the wind picked up, and the man closest to us let out a holler. Shall they got a powerful stink on them, he cried, backing away from us. The other two pretty much followed suit, coming closer, then backing off as soon as they got a good whiff. That's when I found that my knees worked just fine. We ran off the road and into the woods, and we didn't stop running till our sides hurt. Jupiter was so shook up his teeth were chattering, and I was trying hard not to cry. After meeting with those bad fellows, we decided it was too dangerous to travel by the road. We have We'd have to stick to the woods instead. We found a creek we were able to wash the stink off, though we were both wondering if maybe we ought to leave it on, as if we served us so well. The only thing that kept me from crying today was thinking of you, Austin. You're the bravest brother a boy could ever have, going on alone to Oregon like you did. And also, I kept those tears back behind my eyes because I don't want you to ever have to be disappointed in me. I want to be as strong on this trip as you were on yours. You always told me how brave Pa was, how we each had some of him in us. I think you got more than I do. But even with the little bit I got, I aim to use it to make him proud. Oh, I know Pa's gone, but sometimes I think about the what Preacher Tully says about the good souls going to heaven. And I think about Pa looking down from his place in heaven, and Ma there with him, listening out for us. And I imagine Pa smiling skepting when he hears a hiccup. Your brother, Levi.